that copy that one or that mention that one. In order to get a patent, you have to distinguish your new idea from previous similar ideas. So there are 132 knockoffs that are copying his patent, but in some variation. So he obviously started a trend here. But the actual permission to trade in real dollars has just been, they haven't totally finalized it yet. They're expecting it this week.
Who approved it?
I believe it's the SEC.
See, I don't get that. What is all this talk about financial reform? And then the agencies that are supposed to be stewarding the responsible use of trading transactions and buying and selling, and the financial industries not doing what they have to do. I don't get it. The SEC is not doing their job if they just approve this.
Yeah. Well, it's like the FDA, approved mercury amalgam for all uses. I mean, they're all like a revolving door. Or look at Robert Rubin, who was head of Goldman Sachs and then became Treasury Secretary long enough to change the rules so that they got Glass-Steagall withdrawn, which meant that now investment firms or investment banks could also be commercial banks, which put them in a position to speculate with our money, which is what they've been doing ever since. So they get in there into politics long enough to change the rules to favor their own companies, and then they go back to their own companies.
What do you think of short selling?
I think it should be illegal. Naked short selling is illegal, but they still do it. Market makers are allowed to do it. And everybody says, well, short selling's good, that it prevents irrational exuberance, but I just don't see it. I mean, I think you shouldn't be able to sell something you don't have. That it just messes up markets. Bear Stearns was brought down by short sellers, and it wasn't even the naked short sellers, it was just the short sellers.
It also allows for and invites conflict of interest. It invites fraud, because you can have advance warning of something bad that's going to happen and then short the market.
Right, or you can create a negative environment. You can spread rumors, which is what happened to Bear Stearns. It happened to Lehman Brothers. I mean, they were both on shaky ground, but there was this sudden surge of rumors is what brought them down. Or even in 1907, that's what J.P. Morgan did, spread this rumor of those two big banks that were supposedly bankrupt, and then there was a run on the banks, and that's what precipitated the Federal Reserve Act, which was passed in 1913.
In your article on Computerized Front Running, another Goldman Dominated Fraud, you talk about reviving the free market. You talk about a potential Tobin tax. Talk about that. How could we revive the free market? What mechanisms can be put in place? This is one of them, to instill the possibility that a free market can exist.
Well, a Tobin tax would be a tiny tax on every trade. So the proposals range from 0.005% to 1%. But if I quoted an example from Carl Denninger of how this flash trades and front running works, electronic front running, and in the example he gave, they were making 1%. So it would have to be at least a 1% tax to really kill high-frequency trading. And people squawk like crazy about that, but we tax everything else. I mean, here in California, we're paying 10% for a pair of shoes. Parents who go to get their kids' school things for school are paying a 10% tax. And this is not a tax on profit. This is a tax when you buy the thing. So when you buy stock is the only thing that's not taxed right now. Actual trades, this is buys and sells, trades of stock. So if you're a real seller of stock or buyer of stock, you really want to hold it long term, like you really believe in General Motors and you want to watch it grow and like for 30 years like our grandparents did. You'll only have to pay that 1% once, so that's very cheap. It's not going to be felt at all. It's only going to be felt by these nanosecond trades that are skimming tiny profits off of millions of trades very fast.
When you found out about this on Max Keiser's show, Was it live when you found out about it, or did you know about it before and you had the discussion?
I don't actually remember how it came up, but it was something that came up, and then I started emailing him about it, and I kept probing into it. So, I see my role as turning all this stuff into something understandable. I mean, when he would answer my questions, I still didn't know what the heck he was talking about, so I kept asking and asking. But that's the way. These people that are in the field, they don't even realize that they're not talking your language. So what I think I'm good at is to spot that, see that there's something important here that we all don't understand, and to keep probing till I figure out what it is and put it into a form of prose that's interesting and understandable. And in fact, I always run it by several friendly editors to make sure they get it before I put it out there.
Do you think that high-frequency trading, any type of simulated trading or automatic trading, is legal and should be legal on any level?
Well, I would say no, but I have to say I'm not in the field. I did see somebody posted a comment to my article that it had made markets more efficient in some way, so I don't know about that. I mean, I could actually see making many things be computerized. I mean, like, you could have computerized voting, and we could all vote on every single issue, but you're going to have some sort of program that guarantees that it's not manipulated and that there's not cheating going on.
What's new for you in the next few months? What have you been noticing since you have started to propose that states develop their own banks? What have you noticed since we spoke in October and a few months ago? What's different? What's changing with regard to people taking on your proposal?
Well, that is my favorite thing right now. That's where I think we can get a foot in the door. Congress is totally bought and paid for by Wall Street. And, I mean, you can just see right now the Republicans are filibustering everything. They're not allowing anything to pass. It's never happened before that they've been so deadlocked in Congress. And on the state level, that's not true. The states are desperate that they can't meet their budgets. They are required to balance their books, unlike the federal government, which can just go into debt indefinitely, which it has done. They're now $12 trillion, pushing almost up to $13 trillion. I think it's 12.8 now. And they don't care because there's no rule against that, whereas the states could literally go bankrupt. And what happens when they don't have the money is they have to borrow. And then, for instance, in California, we now have a credit rating that's hovering right above Greece's, and that means that our interest rates are pushed way up. This is actually unfair because California has never defaulted on its debts. The states haven't defaulted for, I don't remember, like 100 years or something. There was some instance of some state defaulting, I think, in the 20s. They just don't default. They've got the taxpayers to make sure that they can at least pay the interest on their debts. And meanwhile, corporations default all the time, and they're held to a different standard. So they're liable to have higher ratings than the states, and they're paying less interest than the states.
What happens if California's credit rating sinks further down? Does some other agency come in and take over? Does another country own California? Does another agency come in, like the IMF, and just take over California? What transpires?
Well, the lower our credit rating sinks, the more we have to pay to borrow. That's all. But so that's my point, is that we don't need to borrow. We can set up our own banking system, fund it in the same way that other banks are set up. All banks are not lending their own money, and they're not lending their depositors' money. They are creating credit on their books, and that's what they lend. Our state bank could do exactly the same thing. There's one state in the union that does that. That's North Dakota. They've done it since 1919. They are now the only state that is solvent, or that is, actually has a surplus. There's one other, Montana, that's not yet in the red, but by next year they're projected to have to cut back on services in order to meet their budgets. And meanwhile, like last year when California was paying in IOUs, North Dakota was talking about whether they should add more services or cut back on their taxes. I mean, they were the only state that was in that position, that was just flowing with money and credit.